The October mist clung to the towering Douglas firs of Olympic National Forest like ghostly fingers, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that 16-year-old Marcus Chen was determined to capture through his camera lens. The Seattle teenager pressed himself closer to an ancient cedar trunk, adjusting his camera settings for the perfect shot that would define his high school photography portfolio. Marcus had convinced his parents to let him drive alone to Olympic National Forest that Saturday morning, promising to stay on marked trails and return before dark. David Chen, busy with the family restaurant in Seattle's International District, had reluctantly agreed, but insisted on installing a tracking app on Marcus's phone. "Just for emergencies," he'd said in Mandarin, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. The Ho River Trail had offered beautiful but predictable shots, the kind every tourist captured. Marcus needed something extraordinary for his portfolio, something that would set him apart from other applicants to art school. When he spotted an unmarked deer trail leading toward what his map labeled as Deep Creek Basin, the teenager made a decision that would change everything. 2 hours into his unauthorized detour, Marcus realized the GPS on his iPhone 3GS was showing only green wilderness, with no clear path back to the main trail. More concerning, his signal bars had dwindled to nothing. The dense canopy of Olympic National Forest's temperate rainforest created natural dead zones that swallowed cell signals like the forest swallowed hikers. That's when Marcus first heard the footsteps. At first, he dismissed the sounds as natural forest noise, falling branches, small animals moving through the undergrowth. But the pattern was too deliberate, too purposeful. Something was following him through the maze of ancient trees and sword ferns that had stood in this wilderness for centuries. Marcus stopped beside a massive fallen log to check his phone one more time. Still no signal. The forest around him stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with the sounds of rushing water and wind through the canopy. Olympic National Forest covered nearly 1 million acres, much of it roadless wilderness where people could vanish without a trace. "Beautiful camera you got there, son." The voice came from directly behind him. Marcus spun around to find a man in his mid-40s wearing camouflage hunting gear that had seen better years. His face was weathered by countless hours outdoors, but it was his pale blue eyes that made Marcus's skin crawl. Cold, calculating, predatory. "I'm actually heading back now," Marcus said, backing away slowly while clutching his camera bag. "My parents are expecting me." "Now that's funny," the stranger said with a southern drawl, "because I've been watching you for the past hour, and you don't look like you know which way back is. Name's Earl Briggs. Been hunting these woods for 20 years. Marcus felt his heart hammering as Earl stepped closer, hands casually at his sides, but never taking those cold eyes off the expensive camera equipment. The teenager understood with sudden, terrible clarity that he was completely alone with a predator in one of America's most dangerous wildernesses. "Please," Marcus whispered. "I just want to go home." Earl's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Oh, we'll get you sorted out, boy. But first, you and I are going to take a little walk, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you." As Earl produced zip ties from his jacket pocket with practiced efficiency, Marcus realized this wasn't a chance encounter. This man had been planning, waiting, hunting. The teenager's last coherent thought before terror overwhelmed him was a desperate hope that his father's tracking app might somehow save his life. In the depths of Olympic National Forest, where ancient trees had witnessed centuries of secrets, another nightmare was beginning. But this time, Marcus Chen would make sure it was the last one Earl Briggs ever orchestrated. Earl Briggs secured the zip ties around Marcus's wrists with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual many times before. The teenager's expensive camera equipment clinked softly as Earl transferred it to his own weathered backpack, each piece handled with the care of someone who understood its value on the black market. "See, here's how this works, boy," Earl explained in his southern drawl as he led Marcus deeper into Olympic National Forest's trackless wilderness. "These woods have been my home for 20 years. I know every game trail, every creek crossing, every place where folks like you disappear without a trace." The path Earl chose wound through terrain so dense and remote that it wouldn't appear on any Park Service map. Ancient Douglas firs towered overhead, their branches so thick they blocked out most of the afternoon light. The undergrowth was a maze of sword ferns and fallen logs that would challenge even experienced hikers, but Earl moved through it with the confidence of absolute familiarity. Marcus tried to memorize landmarks: a distinctive boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, a creek where the water ran red with tannins from fallen leaves, a massive cedar with lightning scars down its trunk. But Earl seemed to sense his thoughts. "Save yourself the trouble of mapping our route, son. Even if you somehow got away from me, you'd be lost within minutes. Olympic National Forest covers nearly 1 million acres, and most folks who get turned around in here are never seen again, at least not alive." The statistics Earl cited weren't entirely accurate, but they contained enough truth to chill Marcus to the bone. Olympic National Park did have one of the highest rates of unexplained disappearances in the Pacific Northwest. Hundreds of people had vanished in these woods over the decades, their fates remaining mysteries that haunted families and frustrated investigators. After an hour of difficult hiking, Earl's camp came into view through the trees. It was far more sophisticated than Marcus had expected: a military surplus tent beside an elaborate fire pit, surrounded by equipment that must have cost thousands of dollars. Solar panels gleamed dully in the filtered sunlight, connected to a battery system that could power the operation indefinitely. But what made Marcus's blood run cold were the personal items scattered around the camp: a woman's hiking boot beside the fire pit, a torn section of what looked like a park ranger's uniform hanging from a tree branch. Most disturbing of all was a bulletin board covered with identification cards, driver's licenses, and park passes that told the story of Earl's previous victims. "Welcome to my home away from home," Earl said with twisted pride. "Hope you're comfortable here, because you're going to be staying a while. Long enough for me to decide what to do with you." The camp's location explained how Earl had operated undetected for so long. It was hidden in terrain so remote that search teams would need days to reach it, if they ever found it at all. The killer had chosen his base of operations with the careful planning of someone who understood both the wilderness and law enforcement procedures. Earl began setting up restraints with mechanical precision, using eye bolts screwed into trees and chains anchored to the ground. This wasn't improvised. It was a system he had perfected over years of practice. Marcus realized with growing horror that he wasn't Earl's first victim, and without a miracle, he wouldn't be the last. "The beauty of Olympic National Forest," Earl explained as he worked, "is that people expect hikers to go missing. Steep ravines, unpredictable weather, easy to get turned around. When folks don't come home, everyone assumes they fell off a cliff or died of exposure. Nobody thinks to look for someone like me." As Earl secured Marcus to the restraint system, the teenager caught sight of something that made his heart leap. His phone had fallen from Earl's backpack and was lying partially hidden beneath some equipment. If the battery still had any charge, and if he could somehow reach it, he might be able to send one final message before Earl discovered what he was doing. But first, Marcus had to figure out how to get free from the restraints, and he had to do it before Earl's attention returned to his newest captive. Because based on the evidence around the camp, Marcus knew that Earl Briggs had been perfecting the art of murder in America's wilderness for far longer than anyone had imagined. The question that haunted Marcus as Earl disappeared into the forest to check his perimeter was simple but terrifying. How many families were still waiting for their loved ones to come home from Olympic National Forest? Marcus had been studying the restraint system for 20 minutes when Earl's footsteps finally faded into the Olympic National Forest's undergrowth. The zip ties around his wrists were cutting deep, but the teenager had noticed something crucial during Earl's setup. The eye bolt securing his left restraint had been screwed into dead wood, weakened by years of Pacific Northwest moisture. The phone lay just 4 feet away, partially hidden beneath camping equipment, where it had fallen from Earl's backpack. Marcus could see the Apple logo glowing faintly, indicating the battery still held some charge. His father's tracking app would be useless without cell signal, but if he could reach even 1 bar of coverage, a simple text message might save not just his own life, but the lives of future victims. Working his left thumb against the restraint, Marcus managed to create enough slack to reach the loose eye bolt. The wood crumbled as he twisted, sending insects scurrying from their disturbed home. Pain shot through his dislocated thumb, but 15 years of Earl's victims had endured far worse. Marcus wasn't going to let their suffering be meaningless. With his left hand free, Marcus crawled toward his phone, every movement deliberate and quiet. Earl's camp revealed more horrific details in the afternoon light. Journals filled with clinical observations about previous victims, a collection of jewelry that represented lives cut short, and most chilling of all, a detailed map showing burial sites scattered throughout Olympic National Forest's 1,000,000 acres of wilderness. The phone showed one flickering bar of signal, barely enough for emergency services. Marcus's hands shook as he composed what might be his final message. Dad help trapped Olympic forest killer Earl Briggs GPS, followed by his approximate coordinates. He hit send just as he heard Earl's boots approaching through the undergrowth. Marcus quickly shoved the phone back under the equipment and forced his hand through the loosened restraint, pretending to be unconscious. Through barely opened eyes, he watched Earl return with firewood and what appeared to be hunting equipment. The killer moved with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged in his domain. I know you're awake, boy, Earl said without looking at him. Breathing pattern gives it away every time. Learned that from Sarah Mitchell. She was a park ranger, real smart about medical things. Took me 12 days to break her completely. Earl began unpacking tools that made Marcus's stomach lurch with terror. The killer's methods had clearly evolved over 15 years, becoming more sophisticated and prolonged with each victim. But Marcus held on to one thought that gave him strength. Somewhere beyond these woods, his message was traveling through cell towers toward his father. Your first journal entry is going to be simple, Earl continued, setting up a digital recording device. Tell me about your family, your friends, anyone who might come looking for you. And before you even think about lying, remember that I've got all the time in the world to verify everything you tell me. As Earl described his psychological torture techniques with clinical precision, Marcus realized that his desperate gamble had already succeeded in one crucial way. Even if rescue never came, even if he became another victim in Earl's collection, the evidence on his phone would eventually lead investigators to this camp and its horrific secrets. The teenager who had entered Olympic National Forest that morning with dreams of capturing the perfect photograph was now fighting a different kind of battle, not just for his own survival, but for justice for every person who had disappeared in these woods. Marcus Chen was about to become the final piece of evidence that would end Earl Briggs's reign of terror forever. David Chen was closing the register at his family restaurant in Seattle's International District when his phone chimed with Marcus's desperate text message. The GPS coordinates, the word killer, and his son's name spelled out a nightmare that every parent dreads. His hands shook as he dialed 911, his accent thick with panic as he tried to explain the impossible situation to the emergency dispatcher. My son Marcus Chen, 16 years old, he sent me GPS coordinates from Olympic National Forest. He says there's a killer. Earl Briggs. Please, you have to help him. David's voice cracked as he read the coordinates aloud, while his wife Lisa sobbed beside him, already pulling up maps on her laptop. The 911 dispatcher, trained to handle emergency calls with professional calm, immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Olympic National Forest had a reputation among search and rescue teams, nearly 1 million acres of unforgiving wilderness where people could vanish without a trace. A kidnapping report with GPS coordinates and a suspect name was unprecedented in her 12 years of service. Within 30 minutes, the call had escalated to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, Washington State Patrol, and Olympic National Forest Search Coordinator. The GPS coordinates Marcus had provided pointed to an area of deep wilderness, miles from any established trail, accessible only by helicopter or experienced search teams willing to trek through unmarked terrain for hours. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Earl Briggs was conducting his own terrifying interrogation. The digital recorder captured every word as he systematically broke down Marcus's psychological defenses, using techniques perfected over 15 years of victims. The teenager's attempts to lie about his family were met with calculated violence that left him bleeding but conscious. "You see, boy, pain is just information," Earl explained with clinical detachment as he cleaned his knife. "Your body is telling your brain that resistance is costly. Smart folks learn to listen to that information real quick. Stubborn ones? Well, they provide more interesting data for my research." The camp's remote location worked in Earl's favor as the sun began to set over Olympic National Forest. Even if search teams had been mobilized immediately, the difficult terrain meant they were still hours away from reaching the coordinates Marcus had transmitted. Earl had chosen his base of operations specifically for this advantage, far enough from civilization to operate undisturbed, hidden in terrain so challenging that rescue operations would face significant delays. As darkness fell, Earl began implementing emergency protocols he had developed over years of paranoid preparation. Motion sensors positioned around the camp's perimeter would alert him to approaching search teams long before they could mount a rescue attempt. His satellite internet connection allowed him to monitor emergency radio frequencies in real time, giving him advance warning of law enforcement activities. "Your daddy got your message," Earl announced with satisfaction, checking his monitoring equipment. "Search teams are being mobilized as we speak. Problem is, they're starting from the wrong trailhead, and even if they weren't, it'll take them most of the night to reach us through this terrain." Marcus felt his hope cracking as Earl described the tactical situation with military precision. The killer had clearly studied search and rescue procedures, understanding their limitations and response times. Olympic National Forest's vast wilderness, which Marcus had seen as beautiful that morning, now felt like an endless maze designed to prevent his rescue. Earl's journals, scattered around the camp, revealed the extent of his planning. Detailed maps showed multiple escape routes, cached supply locations, and backup campsites scattered throughout the forest. He had been preparing for this moment, the eventual discovery of his operation, for years. Marcus realized with growing horror that even if rescue teams found the camp, Earl might simply disappear deeper into the wilderness with his newest victim. As the night deepened around Olympic National Forest, a desperate race was beginning. Search teams equipped with night vision and GPS technology were fighting their way through miles of trackless wilderness, while Earl Briggs prepared to abandon 15 years of careful work rather than lose the game he had been playing with law enforcement. Marcus Chen, the teenager who had entered these woods with dreams of photography, had become the final piece in a deadly puzzle that was about to determine whether justice would finally reach Olympic National Forest's most dangerous predator. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez of the Washington State Patrol Aviation Unit had coordinated hundreds of search operations in her 12 years of service. But the urgency surrounding Marcus Chen's case was unprecedented. The GPS coordinates transmitted in the teenager's desperate text message pointed to one of Olympic National Forest's most challenging areas. Dense wilderness, accessible only by helicopter, or grueling overland treks that could take search teams 8 to 12 hours to complete. Ground teams are mobilizing from 3 different trailheads, Rodriguez reported over the emergency frequency, as her helicopter swept across the forest canopy. Olympic mountain rescue volunteers are responding, but the terrain is working against us. We're looking at a minimum 4-hour approach through trackless wilderness, and that's assuming optimal conditions. The Search Coordination Center established at Olympic National Forest headquarters buzzed with activity as multiple agencies pooled resources for what was rapidly becoming the largest search operation in the park's recent history. FBI agents were en route from Seattle after learning that Marcus's text had identified a specific suspect, Earl Briggs, suggesting this wasn't a simple case of a lost hiker. Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson studied topographic maps with growing concern. The coordinates led to terrain so remote that his most experienced volunteers would struggle to reach it before dawn. "This area is off every established trail," he explained to the assembled search teams. "Steep ravines, dense canopy, no landing zones for aircraft. If someone's holding a hostage out there, they chose their location well." Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Earl Briggs monitored emergency radio frequencies through his sophisticated communication setup. His 15 years of operation in Olympic National Forest had taught him exactly how search teams functioned, their response times, and their limitations. The satisfied smile on his weathered face revealed his confidence that the vast wilderness would protect him once again. "Your rescue cavalry is coming, boy," Earl announced to Marcus, who was now secured to multiple anchor points after his earlier escape attempt. "Problem is, they're starting from the wrong place and moving through terrain that'll chew them up and spit them out. By the time they reach these coordinates, we'll be long gone to one of my backup locations." The killer's emergency protocols, developed over years of paranoid preparation, included multiple escape routes and cached supplies scattered throughout the forest. Motion sensors positioned around his camp's perimeter would give him hours of advance warning before any search team could approach. Earl had been planning for this moment since he'd established his operation, the eventual discovery that would force him to abandon his base and disappear deeper into America's wilderness. As the hours passed, Marcus listened to the distant sound of helicopters conducting grid searches miles away from their actual location. The coordination efforts, hampered by Olympic National Forest's 1,000,000 acres of roadless terrain, faced the same challenges that had allowed Earl to operate undetected for 15 years. The teenager's desperate gamble had succeeded in alerting authorities, but the vast wilderness that had hidden Earl's crimes was now working against his rescue. The search teams pressed forward through the night, guided by GPS coordinates and determination, unaware that every passing hour was bringing them closer to a crime scene rather than a rescue operation. Marcus Chen's message had finally exposed Earl Briggs's reign of terror, but whether it would come in time to save the brave teenager who sent it remained a race against Olympic National Forest's most dangerous predator and its most unforgiving terrain. The piercing cold of Olympic National Forest's October night bit through Marcus Chen's torn clothing as Earl Briggs prepared to abandon his base of operations after 15 years. The killer's emergency protocols, refined through decades of paranoid preparation, transformed him into a machine of calculated efficiency as he destroyed evidence and packed essential supplies into military-grade backpacks. "Time to go, boy," Earl announced, cutting Marcus free from the anchor points, but immediately securing his hands with fresh zip ties. "Search teams are making better progress than I expected. My perimeter sensors picked up movement about 3 miles out. They'll be here by dawn if they don't get lost in the ravines." The teenager's legs could barely support his weight after hours of restraint and Earl's systematic torture. Blood from multiple cuts had soaked through his shirt, but Marcus forced himself to stay alert. His desperate text message had worked. Rescue teams were coming. The question was whether they would arrive in time, or whether they would find only another crime scene in Earl's collection. Earl's satellite equipment revealed the massive scale of the search operation. Olympic mountain rescue teams were approaching from 3 different directions, supported by Washington State Patrol helicopters and FBI agents who had driven through the night from Seattle. The coordination efforts represented the largest law enforcement mobilization in Olympic National Forest's history. "Your daddy really loves you," Earl said with cruel satisfaction as he monitored radio frequencies. "Must be nice having family that cares enough to turn the whole forest upside down looking for you. Most of my guests never generated this much attention." The killer's backup location was another 8 miles deeper into the wilderness, accessible only through terrain so rugged that helicopters couldn't land and ground teams would need days to penetrate. Earl had been preparing this escape route for years, caching supplies and equipment at strategic points throughout Olympic National Forest's 1,000,000 acres of roadless terrain. As they began their forced march through the darkness, Marcus could hear the distant sound of helicopters sweeping the forest canopy with searchlights. The beams of light seemed impossibly far away, but they represented hope that someone was fighting to bring him home. Every step away from the abandoned camp was a step further from rescue. But Marcus clung to the knowledge that his message had finally exposed Earl's operation. The trail Earl chose wound through some of Olympic National Forest's most challenging terrain: steep ravines carved by centuries of rainfall, fallen trees that required climbing over or crawling under, and creek crossings where the water ran fast and cold. Marcus's strength was failing, but Earl showed no mercy, using threats and violence to keep his captive moving toward whatever hell awaited at their destination. "The beauty of this location," Earl explained as they climbed over a massive deadfall, "is that even if they find my old camp, they'll assume you're already dead. Search teams will spend weeks combing the immediate area, but they'll never think to look this far out. By the time they expand their search grid, if they ever do, you'll be just another mystery that Olympic National Forest swallowed up." Marcus realized with growing horror that Earl's plan might actually work. The vast wilderness that surrounded them could hide secrets for decades. Hikers disappeared in these woods every year, their fates remaining mysteries that haunted families forever. Without additional clues to guide searchers, Marcus might join the ranks of the permanently missing, another name on the memorial wall of people who had entered Olympic National Forest and never returned. The sound of helicopters faded as they moved deeper into the wilderness, replaced by the eternal silence of ancient trees and rushing water. Somewhere behind them, search teams were discovering Earl's abandoned camp with its horrific collection of trophies and evidence. But ahead lay only darkness, and the terrible realization that Marcus Chen's brave gamble might have come too late to save his own life. Dawn broke over Olympic National Forest, with the kind of crystalline beauty that Marcus Chen had originally hoped to photograph. But the teenager could no longer appreciate the filtered sunlight streaming through the ancient Douglas firs. Earl Briggs had driven them through 8 miles of punishing terrain during the night, and Marcus's strength was finally giving out completely. "End of the line, boy," Earl announced, as they reached his secondary camp, a crude shelter built into a natural rock overhang that would be invisible to aerial searches. The location was so remote that it didn't appear on any topographic map, hidden in a maze of ravines that would challenge even the most experienced search teams. Marcus collapsed beside a fallen log, his body finally refusing to carry him any further. The cuts from Earl's torture had reopened during their forced march, soaking his torn clothing with blood. But even through his pain, the teenager felt a strange sense of peace. His desperate text message had worked. Somewhere behind them, search teams were discovering Earl's abandoned camp with its horrific collection of evidence. "Your rescue teams found my old place about 2 hours ago," Earl said with clinical detachment, as he monitored radio frequencies on his portable equipment. FBI's calling it the largest crime scene in Pacific Northwest history. 14 different victims confirmed so far, with evidence suggesting many more. The killer's voice carried no remorse, only the satisfaction of someone whose work was finally being appreciated. Earl had spent 15 years perfecting his operation, and now the full scope of his achievement was being revealed to law enforcement agencies, who had never imagined such systematic predation was possible in America's wilderness. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. "They'll find you." Earl's laughter echoed off the rock walls of their shelter. "Son, they're still 8 miles away, searching an area the size of Manhattan. Even if they expand their grid, which could take days, this location won't show up on any of their maps. I've got enough supplies cached here to last months, and when things cool down, I'll just disappear into Canada through wilderness routes that don't exist on any border patrol maps." The teenager's vision was beginning to blur from blood loss and exhaustion, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Marcus had accepted that he wouldn't survive this encounter, but he was determined to gather as much information as possible about Earl's operation. Every detail he could remember might help investigators prevent future victims. "The truth is," Earl continued, setting up what appeared to be final recording equipment, "you've actually done me a favor. 15 years in one location was getting risky anyway. Time to relocate the operation, maybe try the North Cascades, or even Alaska. Your little text message just gave me the push I needed to expand my hunting grounds." As Earl prepared for what would clearly be Marcus's final interview, the teenager thought about his parents, probably still waiting at the search command center for news that would never come. David Chen's tracking app had saved other lives by exposing Earl's crimes, but it had come too late to save his own son. The sound of distant helicopters had faded completely, replaced by the eternal silence of Olympic National Forest's deepest wilderness. Marcus Chen, the 16-year-old photographer, who had entered these woods with dreams of art school, was about to become the final victim in Earl Briggs's Pacific Northwest killing spree, but also the key to finally stopping it. The recording device captured Marcus Chen's final words with crystal clarity as the 16-year-old photographer summoned the last of his strength to speak directly into Earl Briggs's camera. Blood loss and exhaustion had pushed him beyond the point of rescue, but Marcus's voice carried the quiet determination that had defined his character throughout the nightmare. "My name is Marcus Chen from Seattle, Washington," he whispered, staring directly into the lens. "It's October 15th, 2007, and I'm being held by Earl Briggs, a serial killer who has been murdering hikers in Olympic National Forest for 15 years. The camp you'll find 8 miles northeast of his main base contains evidence of at least 14 victims." Earl's satisfied smile faltered as he realized what Marcus was doing. The teenager wasn't begging for his life or breaking down under torture. He was creating evidence. Every detail Marcus provided would guide investigators directly to Earl's operation, even after his death. "He has backup camps throughout the forest," Marcus continued, his photographer's eye for detail serving him one final time. "Supply caches marked with orange surveyor's tape, escape routes leading toward the Canadian border through unmarked wilderness. He monitors police frequencies and has been planning to relocate his operation to Alaska." The killer lunged forward to shut off the recording, but Marcus had already provided enough information to dismantle 15 years of careful planning. Earl's rage erupted in violence that ended the brave teenager's life, but the damage to his operation was irreversible. Meanwhile, 8 miles away, Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson was leading the largest search operation in Washington state history through the abandoned camp that Marcus's GPS coordinates had revealed. The bulletin board of victim identification cards, the sophisticated equipment, and the detailed journals painted a picture of systematic predation that shocked even experienced investigators. "We've got evidence of multiple victims spanning at least 15 years, Patterson radioed to the FBI command center. Detailed maps showing burial sites, escape routes, and what appears to be secondary camp locations. This is the most organized criminal operation we've ever encountered in Olympic National Forest." The breakthrough came when investigators found Earl's monitoring equipment still active and displaying recent radio transmissions. The killer's paranoid habit of recording everything had provided a digital trail that led directly to his current location. Within hours, helicopter units were vectoring toward the coordinates, while ground teams fought their way through miles of trackless wilderness. Earl Briggs had made one fatal mistake in his 15 years of perfect crimes. He had underestimated the courage of a 16-year-old photographer who refused to die in vain. Marcus Chen's final act of defiance would guide investigators straight to Olympic National Forest's most dangerous predator and ensure that no more families would suffer the loss that was about to devastate his own parents in Seattle. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. when FBI technical specialists analyzing Earl's abandoned equipment discovered the killer's fatal mistake: his paranoid habit of automatically backing up all recordings to multiple storage devices. Marcus Chen's final testimony, captured in horrifying detail, provided investigators with a roadmap to Earl's entire operation that no amount of careful planning could have anticipated. "We've got everything," FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez announced to the assembled search teams at the command center. "Victim describes multiple supply caches marked with orange surveyor tape, escape routes toward Canada, and most importantly, specific terrain features around a secondary camp 8 miles northeast of the primary location." The teenager's photographer's eye for detail proved invaluable even in death. Marcus had described the rock overhang shelter with scientific precision: elevation markers, distinctive geological features, and creek crossings that allowed helicopters to narrow their search pattern from hundreds of square miles to a manageable grid. Earl Briggs, monitoring radio frequencies from his supposedly impregnable hideout, felt the first cold touch of genuine fear as search aircraft adjusted their flight patterns based on information that could only have come from his final victim. The boy had died, but somehow his voice was still guiding investigators straight toward Olympic National Forest's most carefully guarded secret. "Ground teams, this is Air 7, crackled over the emergency frequencies. "We've identified the rock formation described in the victim's testimony, requesting immediate ground support for tactical approach to suspect's location." Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson had been fighting through 8 miles of punishing terrain for 6 hours, but the adrenaline of finally cornering Earl Briggs energized his exhausted team. Behind them, FBI tactical specialists and Washington State Patrol officers formed a coordinated net that was slowly tightening around the killer who had terrorized the Pacific Northwest for 15 years. Earl's sophisticated early warning system had been designed to detect approaching search teams, but Marcus's detailed intelligence had allowed investigators to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Motion sensors triggered in sequence as armed officers surrounded the rock overhang where Olympic National Forest's most dangerous predator had made his final stand. "Earl Briggs, this is the FBI," Agent Martinez's voice echoed off the stone walls. "You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible, and no one else needs to die today." The silence that followed lasted exactly 12 seconds before Earl emerged from the shelter with his hands raised, his face showing the defeat of someone whose perfect criminal enterprise had been dismantled by the courage of a 16-year-old boy who refused to die quietly. The tragedy that investigators discovered inside the rock shelter would haunt everyone involved in the case. Marcus Chen's body showed evidence of the torture that had preceded his death, but also the incredible bravery of a teenager who had used his final moments to ensure that no other families would suffer the loss that was about to devastate his own parents. As Earl Briggs was secured in federal custody, Olympic National Forest finally began to give up the secrets it had guarded for 15 years. The end of the manhunt marked the beginning of justice for Marcus Chen and the 14 other victims whose disappearances had finally been solved by one teenager's ultimate sacrifice. The federal courthouse in Seattle had never witnessed media attention quite like the circus surrounding Earl Briggs' arraignment, 6 weeks after his capture in Olympic National Forest. News vans lined the street as reporters from across the country gathered to cover the case that had shocked America. A serial killer who had operated undetected in the wilderness for 15 years, finally brought down by the courage of a 16-year-old photographer. Inside courtroom 4B, David and Lisa Chen sat in the front row, their faces etched with the devastating grief of parents who had buried their only son just days earlier. Marcus's funeral had drawn thousands of mourners, including Olympic mountain rescue volunteers, FBI agents, and strangers who had been moved by the teenager's final act of heroism. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez took the witness stand with evidence that painted the most complete picture yet of Earl Briggs's criminal enterprise. The defendant operated what can only be described as a systematic hunting operation spanning 15 years, she testified. We have confirmed physical evidence linking him to 16 victims, with Marcus Chen's final testimony providing the breakthrough that solved cases across the Pacific Northwest. The evidence was overwhelming. Earl's detailed journals documented his psychological experiments on victims, his careful selection process targeting solo hikers, and his methods for disposing of bodies throughout Olympic National Forest's vast wilderness. The satellite internet records showed how he had monitored missing persons reports and search operations, constantly refining his techniques to avoid detection. Marcus Chen saved countless future victims, Agent Martinez continued. His final recording provided specific details about cache locations, escape routes, and operational procedures that allowed us to completely dismantle this criminal network. Without his courage, Earl Briggs might have continued killing for years. The prosecution presented Earl's own recordings as evidence, including the chilling final interview, where Marcus had deliberately provided investigators with a roadmap to the killer's entire operation. The teenager's clear, methodical description of Earl's methods, even as he was dying, demonstrated extraordinary bravery that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Earl Briggs showed no emotion as the evidence mounted against him, maintaining the same cold demeanor that had characterized his years of predation. His defense team's arguments about mental illness seemed hollow against the sophisticated planning and operational security that the investigation had revealed. The families of Earl's other victims filled the gallery, many meeting for the first time despite sharing the bond of loss. Sarah Mitchell's elderly parents sat beside the relatives of Gilbert Gilman, whose 2006 disappearance had sparked one of Olympic National Forest's largest search operations without success. Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson testified about the challenges investigators had faced. Earl Briggs understood our procedures better than most of our own volunteers, he explained. He chose locations specifically designed to defeat traditional search methods, operated with military precision, and studied our response patterns for years. The trial revealed how Earl had evolved his methods over time, beginning with quick kills, but gradually extending the psychological torture as his confidence grew. His journals described these sessions in clinical terms that horrified everyone who heard them read aloud. When the jury returned after less than 3 hours of deliberation, their verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts. 16 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Judge Patricia Williams scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the outcome was certain. Earl Briggs would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. As the gavel fell, David Chen felt a complex mixture of justice and emptiness. His son's killer would pay for his crimes, but Marcus would never come home. The tracking app he had insisted on installing had ultimately saved lives by exposing Earl's operation, but it had come too late to save his own child. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over hundreds of criminal cases in her 20-year career, but the sentencing of Earl Briggs carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the packed federal courtroom. The families of 16 victims filled the gallery, their faces reflecting years of unanswered questions that had finally found resolution through the ultimate sacrifice of Marcus Chen. Earl Briggs, Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying absolute finality. For your systematic campaign of terror against innocent Americans seeking the peace of our nation's wilderness, for the 16 lives you took and the countless families you destroyed, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 400 years on additional charges. David and Lisa Chen sat in the front row, holding each other as the gavel fell. The justice they had fought for was finally delivered, but it felt hollow without Marcus there to see his killer face consequences. Their son's courage had solved the Pacific Northwest's most baffling series of disappearances, but the price had been everything they held dear. Earl Briggs showed no emotion as he was led away in shackles, his pale blue eyes as cold as they had been in that forest clearing where investigators found him. The man who had terrorized Olympic National Forest for 15 years would spend the remainder of his life in a maximum security federal prison, far from the wilderness that had enabled his crimes. The case had far-reaching implications that extended well beyond Earl's conviction. Olympic National Forest implemented comprehensive safety reforms, including improved cell tower coverage in remote areas, mandatory GPS tracking for all solo hiking permits, and enhanced coordination between park services and law enforcement agencies. The tracking technology that David Chen had insisted on installing became standard equipment recommended by park rangers across the country. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez used the case to establish new protocols for investigating disappearances in wilderness areas. Marcus Chen's final testimony demonstrated that even in the most remote locations, modern technology combined with human courage can overcome the most sophisticated criminal operations, she testified before Congress. We've established the Chen Protocol, rapid response procedures for wilderness kidnappings that could save countless lives. Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson found himself at the center of a national conversation about wilderness safety. The Marcus Chen Memorial Fund, established by his parents, provided advanced communication equipment to search and rescue teams across America. That brave kid's sacrifice taught us that no wilderness is too remote for justice to reach, Patterson said at the fund's dedication ceremony. The investigation into Earl's crimes continued long after his sentencing, as federal agents worked to identify additional victims and provide closure to families across the Pacific Northwest. The sophisticated nature of his operation had revealed gaps in interagency communication that were systematically addressed through new legislation known as the Wilderness Safety Act. Marcus's photography equipment, recovered from Earl's camp, contained images that were posthumously exhibited in galleries across Seattle. The final photographs on his camera, images of Olympic National Forest taken just hours before his kidnapping, became powerful symbols of the beauty and danger that coexisted in America's wilderness areas. The Chen family established an annual scholarship at Marcus's high school for students pursuing photography or criminal justice, ensuring that their son's passion for capturing truth through his lens would inspire future generations. Recipients were required to complete wilderness safety training, turning Marcus's tragic experience into education that could prevent similar tragedies. As the one-year anniversary of Marcus's death approached, Olympic National Forest remained one of America's most beautiful and challenging wilderness destinations. But thanks to the safety reforms implemented in Marcus's memory, it was also a safer place. His final act of courage had not only brought justice to Earl Briggs's victims, but had created a lasting legacy that would protect countless future visitors to America's wilderness areas. The teenager who had entered those woods with dreams of photography had become something far greater. A hero whose sacrifice illuminated the darkness that could hide in even the most beautiful places, and whose courage ensured that such darkness would never again go unchallenged. 5 years after Marcus Chen's death in Olympic National Forest, his parents stood before the newly unveiled memorial that would forever mark the spot where their son's courage had changed American wilderness safety forever. The bronze plaque, mounted on a massive Douglas fir near the Ho River trailhead, bore a simple inscription: Marcus Chen Memorial Trail, in honor of those who sacrifice everything so others might live safely in our nation's wilderness. David and Lisa Chen had channeled their grief into a movement that transformed how America protected its outdoor enthusiasts. The Marcus Chen Wilderness Safety Act, signed into law by President Bush in 2009, mandated GPS tracking capabilities in all national forests, established rapid response protocols for wilderness emergencies, and created the first comprehensive database of missing persons in America's public lands. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez, now director of the Bureau's Wilderness Crimes Unit, spoke at the memorial dedication. Marcus Chen's final testimony didn't just solve one case. It revolutionized how we investigate disappearances in America's wild places. The protocols we developed from his courage have prevented dozens of similar tragedies and solved cold cases stretching back decades. Olympic Mountain Rescue Coordinator Jake Patterson had used Marcus's story to secure federal funding for advanced communication equipment that transformed search operations across the Pacific Northwest. That brave kid's sacrifice taught us that no wilderness is too remote for justice to reach, Patterson reflected. Every piece of equipment we use, every life we save, carries forward his legacy. The ripple effects of Marcus's heroism extended far beyond Olympic National Forest. Earl Briggs's conviction had prompted investigations into similar disappearances across America's wilderness areas, leading to the identification of other predators who had used the vastness of public lands to conceal their crimes. The Chen Protocol became standard training for park rangers, FBI agents, and search teams nationwide. Marcus's photography equipment, recovered from Earl's final camp, had been transformed into a traveling exhibition that educated visitors about wilderness safety while celebrating the teenager's artistic vision. His final photographs of Olympic National Forest, taken just hours before his kidnapping, became powerful symbols of the beauty and danger that coexisted in America's wilderness areas. The scholarship fund established in Marcus's name had grown into a foundation that provided wilderness safety education to thousands of young people annually. Recipients were required to complete advanced survival training, turning Marcus's tragic experience into knowledge that protected future generations of outdoor enthusiasts. Earl Briggs remained in federal prison, his appeals exhausted, and his life sentence ensuring he would never again threaten innocent people. The monster who had terrorized Olympic National Forest for 15 years had been brought down by the courage of a 16-year-old photographer who refused to die in vain. As the memorial service concluded, Lisa Chen placed her hand on the bronze plaque bearing her son's name. Marcus had entered Olympic National Forest with dreams of capturing the perfect photograph for his art school portfolio. Instead, he had captured something far more valuable, a serial killer whose reign of terror might have continued for decades without his sacrifice. The ancient Douglas firs surrounding the memorial had witnessed centuries of human stories, but few as powerful as that of Marcus Chen, the teenager whose final act of courage illuminated the darkness that could hide in America's most beautiful places, ensuring that such evil would never again go unchallenged in the wilderness he had loved and died to protect.